Welcome to Chillers and Thrillers Extra, paranormal stories just for my YouTube subscribers. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And now let's get started. The Childhood Home, submitted by user Ragnarok the House. Back when I lived in New York, I was terrified of our house. While living there, I refused to go to the foyer, guest room, or basement without all the lights on. My parents never believed it, but I should note that none of my or any of my siblings' friends ever wanted to sleep over at our place. Their parents gave them permission to come over. Once the festivities were over, lights were off, and everything was quiet, everyone wanted to leave. Anyway, there are a few instances that have stuck with me to this day. I remember playing with some toys way after my bedtime. I'm playing, and the whole time I feel like someone is watching me. After a while, I work up the courage to look behind me, and there is this very pale man creature standing outside my window. My bedroom was on the second floor. I stare at him for a while, and all of a sudden, I just feel this urge to open my window. So I walk closer and closer, and then all of a sudden, the bookshelf behind me just completely and utterly collapses. Well, collapse is the wrong word because not one of the shelves were broken. A better choice of word is that literally everything had been knocked off every single shelf and is on a pile on the floor. The noise startles me, so I turn to look at it, and when I turn back, the man is gone. That was the last night I ever slept without the lights on. My little brother, when sleeping one night, swears that someone threw an action figure at his face. This happened 2 or 3 times until he started putting all of his toys in a toy chest and locking it up before sleep. Another incident with him is that one time my mother sent him downstairs to get some marinara sauce. He begrudgingly goes downstairs and is gone for 5 minutes or so while my mom and myself wonder where he went off to. As she gets up, we hear him screech. We run to the basement and find him lying on the floor with his blood everywhere and the skin on his chin just completely torn up. My mom swears that he fell on the marinara sauce jar, which was blood-free and unbroken. But after that, neither of them went into the basement without it being lit first. One time, I had woken up to see a small boy outside of my door in the dark. I thought it was just my brother, so I yelled at him to go to bed. He just stood there. So after a few minutes of me talking to him and no reply, I tell him that if he doesn't go to bed right now, I will make him go to bed. He nods his head and beckons me forward. As I go, I can see my brother lying in his bed, asleep in his room across from me. Naturally, I freaked out. Anytime any kid would go into the guest room, where we kept the Super Nintendo and video games, we would chill there with our friends until we started telling ghost stories. Each time, we would joke about it being pirates, zombies, vampires, what have you. But each time, it would devolve into being a story of a man who absolutely hated kids. It would go on until one of us would say, "He wants us gone. Now," in which we would all run out of the room. We all thought it was jokes and us attempting to creep each other out, until one day my sister, who was 5 and never part of the festivities, much less heard the stories for fear of upsetting her, is asked to go to that room for something. She absolutely refuses, which was something she had never done. And when asked why, she says, "He hates it when we go into the room, and he's scary when he's upset." That was when I stopped going to the guest room, unless it was daylight. The last incident I can remember is me being home alone around the time I was 12 or 13. I'm doing my homework and watching Dragon Ball Z when I hear the door open and close and a woman talking. I yell out, "Hey, Mom!" and the talking immediately stops. I assume my mom didn't hear me, so I go back to doing what I was doing, and next I hear a man and woman talking. I know it's not my dad. He was working late, so I call out to see who it is, and nothing. At this point, I assume it's our neighbors. They were very loud, so I go about my business again. The third time, it sounds like they're arguing, so I continue to ignore it, and once again it stops. Then, all I hear is glass shattering, and the yelling becomes a screaming match. I run to the stairs to see what it is, and nothing. The next thing I know, I feel like someone has given me a strong push, and I go down the stairs. Fortunately, I walked away from it with nothing but a broken toe and a split lip. At that point, my mom had my uncle, who was a priest, as well as 2 of our neighborhood priests come by to bless everything. After that, the major incidents stopped, but never once did I feel comfortable at that house. From what I understand, the house hasn't had an occupancy that has lasted more than 2 years since then. The Brownstone, submitted by author McStabby Pants. We moved into a rental brownstone when my son was about a year old. It was pretty, but very old and run down, and the longer we lived in it, the creepier it seemed to get. There were spiders living in the front windows that I could never get rid of, and I was constantly cleaning cobwebs out of the corners. The whole house had mahogany trim that was so old the finish had blackened and alligatored in parts, and the dining room was covered in dark oak paneling with a huge carved mantel that made it look like a Freemason lodge. My husband and I always joked that it was the perfect Halloween house. In fact, we had a number of Halloween parties while we lived there, and we barely had to decorate. The basement of this brownstone was really creepy. There was one room we were allowed to use, and we had our stationary bike and a couch down there so we could watch movies. But the other room was locked with a padlock. Our landlord had never quite been able to get rid of all her stuff, so she used that room for storage. A corridor ran along the far wall, which was dark and dank and led to an old kitchenette area and a bathroom with a shower, both of which were piled high with dusty, forgotten furniture. When we first moved to the house, my son was not talking yet, just babbling, and he would often babble to the wall. He was a happy baby and liked to laugh, and he would babble at the wall, then listen for a minute, and then babble again, as if he were holding a conversation with someone. And sometimes he would babble, and then wait, and then he would laugh and laugh and laugh. When he finally started talking, he didn't stop talking to the wall. So one day, on a whim, I asked him who he was talking to. "I'm talking to the man," he said. "What man?" I asked. "The man lives here," he replied. It kind of creeped me out, but then I figured he had an excellent imagination for a toddler. And boy, was it consistent, because every time I asked him who he was talking to, he would answer, "the man." And he would laugh and laugh and laugh. Then, one night, I was in the kitchen making dinner, and I heard the basement door open and close. I figured it was my husband, but then I heard running up the stairs and scrambling at the door. And then my son burst through the door, sobbing and crying, obviously terrified. I picked him up and hugged him, and he was shaking. I asked him what was wrong, but all he could say was, the man," over and over. He never talked to the wall again, and it was a long time before he ventured down into the basement. Not too long afterwards, I was talking to my neighbor about the house, and she mentioned that many years back, the basement had been used as a doctor's office by a man who lived in the house. I have no idea if this was the man or who the man was, if he was anyone or anything. But I do know that the basement was creepy. In the hallway, there was a piece of flooring that had been cut out and replaced. One day, I picked it up out of curiosity, and underneath, there was a small cavity that had been dug out. And in the cavity, there was an axe. I'm glad we moved far away from there.